warm welcome to you all. Welcome to Reuters Next. This is our definitive live event where we hear from global newsmakers and future thinkers about the greatest challenges and the opportunities facing the world at large, so no pressure. I'm Kim Vanel. I am a journalist with Reuters and I'm the host of Reuters World News podcast. I'm going to be your MC for the day. We have a huge lineup of speakers, but we need to run through a few housekeeping things first. I promise I'll be very, very quick. Number one, fire safety. If the decision has been made to evacuate, you'll hear the alarm. Please proceed to the exit. Everyone must exit immediately and listen to all alarm messages. Please wear your badges at all time. If you lose it, we hope you don't, but you can go to registration to get a new one. Lunch, perhaps the most important part of the housekeeping, will be served in the Grand Gallery and the Crossroads Gallery. And we would love you to join us to continue the conversation after today's speakers and sessions conclude at our drinks reception, which is taking place in the Grand Gallery just out here from 5:40 to 6:40. Now, we would also love you to get involved today. Join the Q&A for all of the sessions, whether you're here with us in the room or joining us on the global broadcast, and I can promise you there are many, many people who will be doing that. So I'm going to bring up the QR code here behind me. You can scan that code now. I'll give you all a moment. Or you can go to slido.com and enter the code #next23. So this is where you submit your questions for the Q&A throughout the event. So if there's someone on stage and you want to ask a question or you feel like the moderator is not asking that question you think needs to be answered, you can ask it. If you're at another stage, at the banking and finance stage, make sure you click, see up there on the right-hand side where it says World Stage, you click there, a drop-down menu comes up and you can change the stage to make sure your questions go to the right place. Now, the sessions today are a mixture of panels and one-on-ones, and you'll hear us mention throughout the day that some sessions will be helmed by the Reuters newsroom and others will be moderated by our commercial colleagues at Reuters events. So the sessions run by the Reuters newsroom come under the Reuters Trust Principles. That means no questions are agreed in advance. Nothing is off the table. These are very much journalism in action, and I, for one, am very much looking forward to it. Now, with that said, it's time to kick off our agenda for the day. So please join me in welcoming Reuters Editor-in-Chief Alessandra Galloni to the stage.
Kim, thank you and welcome everybody. I'm Alessandra Galloni, I'm Reuters Editor-in-Chief, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our 4th annual Reuters Next. So as the name implies, Reuters Next is an opportunity for us to look forward, to look beyond the headlines of the day and to ask, what's next? It's a chance for us to come together to analyze the challenges that we face today, those that we are likely to face tomorrow, and to discuss some solutions. So needless to say, we have our work cut out for us. We're in a highly uncertain economic environment, as you all know. In the West, central banks are expected to keep interest rates high for some time to come in the face of persistent inflation. But there's also concern, as you know, that an overcorrection could lead to a recession. Higher rates are imposing a high burden on many nations around the world, especially in emerging markets. And as they are naturally trying to get through piles of massive debt. And then you add to that, Nix, China's economic issues, 2 major wars, not one, 2 crucial elections, and other crucial geopolitical issues. So 2024 is looking a little troubled. Climate change. Climate change continues to fuel devastating weather events with enduring repercussions across many industries, from wildfires in Hawaii, floods in Libya, and record heat waves across Europe. The number of climate-related events continues to grow, and with it, a shocking economic toll. In Ukraine, the war waged by Russia continues. It has now been nearly 2 years of fighting, and there's no signs of resolution. Thousands are dead, millions are displaced, And the conflict, of course, has led to economic turmoil around the world. And of course, the topic on everyone's minds these days. We are 4 weeks into a devastating conflict between Israel and Hamas, in which more than 10,000 people have been killed in just a month. So in just a few moments, I will sit down with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we're going to talk about the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine. We're going to talk about international humanitarian law and climate change. Later, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will join us virtually to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. These discussions are taking place here, a world stage, where we're going to talk, as I said, about the opportunities and the risks for the future. That includes how to mitigate not only the risks of war, but economic and financial instability and inflation. We're going to look at both the macro and the microeconomy with some top CEOs. And of course, how could we not? We're going to talk about the future of AI and the future of our planet with a number of experts. This year, we have significantly expanded Reuters Next to cover industry and political leaders across a variety of themes. And we're going to have multiple stages, each of which is going to be curated by our newsroom. On the banking and finance stage, which is going to be led by our global finance editor, Paritosh Bansal, you're going to get a look at investment banking, consumer banking predictions, wealth management opportunities and risks. On the AI stage, led by our global tech and media editor, Ken Lee, we're going to explore the business and social ramifications of generative AI. We're going to debate the ethics of it, and we're also going to consider whether smart money should go. In our studio, which you'll see outside, we will dive deep into some of the biggest trends and topics around the world, including the private sector's role in the refugee crisis, female leadership, and the workplace of the future. So yes, we're here to discuss the future, but at the same time, the future is not something that we journalists can reliably predict. Our job is to deliver the facts of the now. At Reuters, our journalists work tirelessly on the ground to deliver the truth, not to predict what is next. We deliver fact-based journalism to billions of people around the world. We provide our readers and our viewers the information that they need to make their decisions about important issues so that they can shape the future and drive a better tomorrow. Delivering facts is not without risk. In the past month, 34 journalists have been killed covering the conflict in the Middle East. That includes one of our own. Our talented visuals journalist, Issam Abdallah, was killed on October 13th. He was in the south of Lebanon covering crossfire between Lebanon and Israel. It is a profound tragedy for us at Reuters, of course, for Issam's family, for his colleagues and his friends. Sorry. We've created a tribute to Issam, with which we aim to highlight some of his superb work at Reuters. So I hope that you will join us in honoring him.
Issam was a handsome young man. I've known him for 17 years. He did not change much. His signature smile never left his face.
Right now there are Russian soldiers and Russian flags all around the city.
He always had that passion and that creativity that made him the special journalist that he was.
Thank you. Issam will be deeply missed, as will all the journalists and indeed all the thousands of people who have been killed in these two tragic conflicts that the world is facing today. And I hope you will sort of join us in thanking all the journalists who put their lives at risk every day to bring us the facts on the ground. But with this, I would like to introduce our first guest, Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Please do join me on the stage. Thank you very much for joining us. We were just saying
it's an enormous pleasure.
that the war is that the world is not being very disciplined at the moment. Is giving us a lot of grief.
That's an understatement.
Indeed. So look, I'd like to jump right in, and in particular let's start with the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Now, you and the UN have called for many things over the past few weeks. You've called for a humanitarian ceasefire, you've called for the release of hostages, you've called for the protection of civilians, the protection of hospitals, and getting more aid into Gaza. So far, your demands have largely gone unheeded. So what is the plan?
Well, the plan is to do everything we can to make those things that need to happen. You mentioned hostages. To be hostage is an absolutely horrendous thing for the person and for the family. I had the experience when I was High Commissioner for Refugees of two colleagues of mine that were kept hostage. One in Pakistan for 6 months, one in Chechnya for 1 year. And it is devastating for the families. So I feel that we have the obligation to do everything possible to obtain the release of hostages. Now, we have no leverage over Hamas for that. But there are some countries that have capacity of influence. Qatar has been extremely positive. I've been in very close contact with Qatar. I even visited Doha to talk with the Prime Minister. Egypt has been very active. Others are doing their best. We are in contact with Israeli authorities too, in relation to situations in the field where we might be useful if things happen. It's absolutely essential that all hostages are released immediately and unconditionally. And it is a terrible violation of the laws of war to have hostages, as it was horrible what we have seen the 7th of October with the killing, the maiming, the torturing, the slaughtering, those horrific acts by Hamas that I have condemned since the beginning. So this is an area where we are extremely active. Second, humanitarian aid inside Gaza. Usually in Gaza we have 500 trucks per day, both humanitarian and commercial trucks to supply 2.2 million people. In the last 18 days, we managed to have 630 trucks. And we are in intense negotiations with Israel, with US, with Egypt, in order to make sure that we have an effective humanitarian aid to Gaza. Until now, it has been too little, too late. Water, fuel has not yet been authorized, and water is very limited. We have problems. Now we have people coming to our premises and asking for water and bread. I mean, so terrible, terrible, catastrophic, I'd say, humanitarian situation. Lack of medicine in hospitals. So it is absolutely essential to have a flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza that corresponds to the dramatic needs that the population is facing. And we are in intense advocacy with Israel, with US, with several others to push for that. Then, international humanitarian law, protection of civilians. It's absolutely crucial. First of all, there are violations by Hamas when they have human shields. But when one looks at the number of civilians that were killed with the military operations, there is something that is clearly wrong. I mean, I'll give you an example. Children. Every year we present a report, sometimes a very polemic report, with how many children are killed and maimed in wars by the different countries that are at war. I've done it since the beginning of my mandate. Every year, the highest number of killing of children by any of the actors in all the conflicts that we witness is the maximum in the hundreds. We had, in a few days in Gaza, thousands and thousands of children killed, which means there is also something clearly wrong in the way humanitarian military operations are being done. So, again, it's a matter of advocacy with Israel, advocacy with the friends of Israel, in order to make sure that we have a humanitarian ceasefire, allowing for the release of hostages more effectively done, allowing for massive entrance of aid, and allowing for alleviating the dramatic situation the people is facing. And I would like to say very clearly, this in nothing should reduce our total rejection for the horrible things that Hamas did the 7th of October. But we need to distinguish. Hamas is one thing, the Palestinian people is another. If we don't make that distinction, I think it's humanity itself that loses meaning.
Absolutely. So let's dissect a few of the things that you have put on the table. You said you're talking to the Israeli authorities. What are you telling them to basically to allow yourselves to enforce and even expand your humanitarian remit in Gaza? And crucially, what are they telling you? Give us an update on where those talks are going, because on the ground, we are not seeing much.
Well, first of all, it's essential that the laws of war are respected. One of the great conquests that we had are the Fourth Geneva Conventions. The laws of war must be respected by everybody and entirely, not a la carte. And one of the things we say to Israel clearly, it is very important that the laws of war are fully respected.
And they're not respecting it now?
Well, as I said, Hamas is using shields, and the number of civilian casualties is so high that something is wrong about the way things are being conducted. But now, it is also important to make Israel understand that it is against the interest of Israel to see every day the terrible image of the dramatic humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people. That doesn't help Israel in relation to the global public opinion. Israel has grievances, very strong grievances about what has happened the 7th of October, but to a certain extent, the sympathy that this generated in the world is being put into question by the images that every day we have in which we see people in a dramatic humanitarian situation. So I think it's in the interest of Israel to, of course, they have their operations to conduct. They are at war with Hamas. That's not what we are questioning, even if we believe that a humanitarian ceasefire is necessary at the present moment. But these must be conducted with full respect to the laws of war, and these must be conducted allowing for the humanitarian aid that is necessary, at the scale that is necessary, to come to the people in Gaza, as we try to do in all other conflicts in the world.
But what is the response so far? Where are you in these negotiations?
Normally,
specifically?
It's not for me to talk on behalf of others. But,
what are they telling you? What are you receiving?
Usually the response is linked to what has happened the 7th of October and what they consider to be their military operations.
Okay, let me talk about the International Criminal Court. The record of the International Criminal Court on prosecutions, has not been stellar. Some don't even recognize its legitimacy, as you know. So do you believe that the allegations of war crimes committed by Hamas and by Israel will ever be investigated and prosecuted?
Well, that is for the court to decide. And one of the things I learned when I was a politician in my country is that the executive will never interfere in the work of courts, and I will never interfere in the work of courts. What I want to say is that I truly believe in the importance of the ICC. We will be doing everything possible in all situations of conflict in which the ICC intervenes to support them in full respect for their independence. And I believe that one of the important conquests in the world in relation to the rule of law was the creation of different courts, not only the ICC, we had the Rwanda court, we had a few others, Yugoslavia court, but a few instances in which accountability is effectively translated in action.
One last question on the humanitarian situation. Considering everything that we have said, what levers does the United Nations have to stop what you have called a possible genocide?
Well, we have no money, we have no power, we have two things: voice, and an independent voice, and a voice that we believe is guided by the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And voice, when voice is morally independent, is an important thing. And second, we have a convening capacity. Just to give an example, nothing to do with these situations we have discussed. We have just created an high-level advisory body in artificial intelligence with people from science, from the public sector, from the private sector, from the civil society, 38 very prestigious personalities to help us come to some concrete suggestions to the Summit of the Future on the governance of AI. So again, no power, no money, but a voice and a platform where people can come together, governments, civil society, businesses, and at least try to find ways to address the dramatic problems of our time. Climate change, technology,
we're going to get to that.
Conflict,
we're going to get to that.
And many others.
Just a record number of UN employees, this affects you personally and your organization personally very, very much. A record number of UN employees have been killed in this conflict.
92.
What are you doing to keep your people safe, and how are you seeking accountability?
It is impossible to keep people safe because, they have to do their job. And some of them died in their houses. Their houses, they were with their families, their houses were bombed. So, it's impossible to keep people safe. Our objective is to create the best possible conditions, to give indications of where are the, for instance, schools, hospitals, etc., for them not to be attacked. So we do everything we can, but I would lie to you if I would say that we are doing enough to keep our people safe, and the result is obvious.
And accountability?
And you can imagine what it is. I pay tribute to your colleague that was killed. And the number of journalists, by the way, killed in this conflict is unique, never seen in such a period anywhere in the world. But you can imagine what it is to run an organization that is working in the field with 92 colleagues that already have been killed. This is, I must tell you, very difficult.
Accountability? How can you seek accountability?
The accountability, as I said, I believe that, first of all, there are different mechanisms of accountability. We support all of them. We, as UN Secretariat, have no instrument of accountability. We fully support the international institutions that were created for that objective.
Let me turn to the day after. The Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has indicated that Israel would seek to have overall security responsibility for Gaza for an indefinite period. Will the UN take the lead, maybe during the years of the recovery in Gaza?
Well, the lead of the UN depends on member states' decisions. I cannot take a decision in relation to that. I think there is a best-case scenario, and I think we should try to work for that best-case scenario. And it's important to give hope to the Palestinian people. For me, the best-case scenario would be that after the military operations end, the Palestinian Authority, and hopefully a revigorated Palestinian Authority, would be able to assume political control in Gaza, There is, of course, a transition that needs to be defined between what is the Israeli occupation and the future solution. Several entities can play a role. The UN can play a role. Several countries that are relevant in the region can play a role. The United States can play a role. So this is something that, of course, needs to be discussed with Palestinians, with Israelis. And then to have this as a starting point of a serious negotiation for a two-state solution. Because I believe sometimes the worst tragedies become an opportunity. This was completely paralyzed. Nothing was moving. Palestinians were losing hope in a dramatic situation. Maybe, and I believe we need to work for the best case scenario, even if we always risk to have a worst case scenario, but maybe this horrible situation may create an opportunity for finally to have a clear movement towards a solution that, in my opinion, must be a two-state solution, in which the question of the security of Israel needs to be fully taken into account, of Israel and the Palestinians, but I understand the concerns of the Israeli people in relation to their own security, and I think there must be a way, in the context of this solution. I remember John Kerry, one of the last things he did when he was Secretary of State was to present a plan for the security of Israel and Palestine in the context of DUSA. There must be a way for the two states to live in peace and with the security guaranteed.
You talked about a transition period. Do you imagine a military UN
I'm
peace?
just speculating.
No, of course. But can you imagine, or have you spoken to the Israeli authorities about a possible UN peacekeeping force to go in this transition?
This is a matter
that
only member states can decide.
So it's not being discussed?
So this was not discussed. I think it's premature to have any discussion of this sort. I believe that if we want to have the Palestinian Authority, and as I said, ideally with a revigorated Palestinian Authority, assuming also political control in Gaza, we need to find a mechanism of transition to allow for it to happen in a positive way. And the UN is one of the possibilities, but we have not discussed in detail any concrete proposal.
Okay.
It's still too early to do that.
You're not off the hook yet. Let me go to Russia, Ukraine. What is the end game?
That's $1 million question. No?
Well, that's why you get paid the big bucks.
I don't know what's the end game,
what compromises need to be made?
But look, as I said, we have no power, we have no money, but we have a voice. And the voice is clear on this. The end game must respect the Charter of the United Nations and international law. And for that, the territorial integrity of Ukraine needs to be guaranteed. Will this happen? Will this not happen? I cannot be sure about it. But that this is the right thing to do, I have no doubt about it. And so, as I have not the power to solve the problem, I have the responsibility to be coherent with the voice that we have and to say we must have a just peace, and a just peace in line with the Charter and in line with international law.
But just to be clear, therefore, what you're saying, there can be no compromises, or should there be compromises to bring people to the negotiating table?
I'm telling you what the principles are for an organization like the UN, what the parties do in their negotiations. It happens all over the world in different ways. It's for them to decide. But I believe it's important that we know what the international principles are and what international law means. Because the day we consider international law doesn't matter, the day we consider the Charter of the United Nations doesn't matter, and I know that normally are the most powerful that violate the Charter, but the day we give up on affirming the principle of law to be maintained, that day we serve no purpose.
The UN did play a key role in this crisis. You brokered the landmark deal in July 2022 to allow the safe passage of Ukraine grain.
And I congratulate Reuters because you were very closely following it.
Yes, we were. We broke that story, only to see it, but of course it fell apart. So can it be revisited?
It will be difficult. We are going on with our efforts, but it will be difficult. I would say the ideal would be if the parties to the conflict would one day accept, because it's vital for both the Ukraine and Russia. The ideal would be if the parties at a certain moment would accept to allow for freedom of navigation in the Black Sea for both. But this is probably to dream too much.
Okay. Let me ask you about another hotspot, Iran. Iran has enough highly enriched uranium now for several nuclear weapons. If enriched further, and if the stockpile continues to grow, do you think that enough is being done to rein in these nuclear ambitions?
Sorry,
do you think enough is being done to rein in Iran's nuclear ambitions?
I think it is clear that non-proliferation is a basic principle for us and for all. So I think that the idea to have another country with nuclear weapons is an idea that we fully reject. Now, the JCPOA was a very important diplomatic achievement. And I was very sorry when the JCPOA was put into question. And I was hopeful that the JCPOA might be, to a certain extent, reborn, probably with some adjustments, and it looked at a certain moment that was possible. The present circumstances have interrupted that, but I think it would be very important to create the conditions that would allow for, to be clear, that Iran will not have nuclear weapons.
Do you think that there is a risk that not enough attention is being paid right now to this very clear risk of Iran's nuclear program, because there's so much going on, Gaza, Ukraine?
Now, the drama is that there is no attention to many other risks. There has been much less attention to climate change. There has been much less attention to the crisis that we are witnessing in Africa. So look at Sudan. Look at the Sahel. If you come out of the border of Senegal and go to the Red Sea, you cross a continent where there is chaos almost everywhere. So, I mean, all these situations have been forgotten. And we see it in the lack of support to our humanitarian programs around the world. The most well-funded program is the Ukrainian humanitarian program. It's funded at 53%. We have programs, humanitarian programs in different parts of the world, namely in Africa, funded at 15, 20%. There has been a progressive neglect of so many things because there is this way in which I think it's a kind of a, not a conspiracy, but a kind of a natural way in which political societies, media societies, and civil societies work together to isolate in each moment the issue that is discussed and to forget about everything else. And this is not good.
You mentioned climate, COP28. Give me 2 success metrics for COP.
Oh, it would be very important if in the COP28 the loss and damage fund would be fully operational. And it would be very important if the COP28 would come with a very clear program in relation to the increase of renewables and in relation to the progressive phase-out of fossil fuels.
Okay, my last question for you. We've talked about conflicts in Gaza, conflict in Ukraine, climate. It seems that the world's major powers are more and more reluctant to be constrained, if you will, by multilateral agreements. Is the UN still the right forum to address such problems?
Well, we have had several multilateral agreements recently. One, for instance, about biodiversity in international waters, just to give an example. And if you look at the General Assembly of the United Nations, we had a remarkable consensus on a declaration on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are preparing a summit of the future. We are going to discuss a new digital compact. We are going to discuss governance in outer space. We are going to discuss a new agenda for peace, the future of peacekeeping, the future of peace enforcing. We are going to discuss the questions of gender parity in the world. We are going to discuss how the interests of future generations can be taken into account in decision-making processes in the UN and at national level. We are going to discuss what are the parameters of a new social contract that is possible with the technological evolution that we are seeing. So, I mean, there are lots of things in which the UN is exactly the place where people can come together to discuss and, in many aspects, to agree.
So
even if we have all these problems.
No power, no money.
But a voice and the capacity to bring people together.
Thank you. And with that, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, for joining us.
Well, that was a fascinating discussion. I hope that advocacy and negotiations that are underway bear some fruit to help those who are suffering. Interesting, Ale, hearing about Mr. Guterres saying that crises are being forgotten because it's not long until COP28 and the Global Stocktake Report is so clear we are not on track to curb global warming. So what are we going to do? What can we do? What are we actually going to do at this year's Conference of Parties in Dubai? So to discuss this, I'd like to invite to the stage a fantastic group of panelists. And for this, I am going to be changing hats from MC to moderator. This panel, I should point out, is an editorial one. That means that nothing has been agreed in advance and nothing is off the table. We've got a lot to discuss. We are going to be talking about the phasing out of fossil fuels. We're going to be talking about whether the focus is going to be on the right things. We're going to be talking about whether climate justice is accurately being addressed, how the loss and damage fund is going to be managed, whether we can meet all of these targets. So let's see now if our panelists are ready. Please come to the stage. Let's give them a round of applause. Hi, Jerome. Hi, nice to meet you. Take a seat. If we start from the end. Who is the Rockefeller Foundation president, and we have Jerome Foster, who is an activist and also on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Board. So thank you very much for joining us here at What Is Next. I'd like to start with you, Rajiv. I just want to get your assessment of the chances of COP actually making a substantive difference. We're hearing Joe Biden may not even turn up. Is COP still fit for purpose?
Well, thank you for having me. And look, I think the COP is extraordinarily important, and we should all have a very high expectation for this particular one. The reason I say that is, as you said in your introduction, we are blowing past all of the major ecosystem milestones on which the global Paris Agreement and the global targets were set. Those are irreversible tipping points related to ice sheet melt and temperature rise. And the global stocktake will show that we're simply not on path. And at the same time, there have been some strong policy actions taken in wealthy economies. So the reason we're not on path is that we haven't made this fight against climate change truly global. There are 80+ countries in the world effectively left out of any meaningful financing to address climate change and to transition their economies. So the COP should be held to a bar to say, are you solving that problem? Are you bringing together global leaders to make binding agreements to finance a climate transition globally? And frankly, the COP is being hosted by a nation that benefits from the extraordinary run-up in oil prices in the last few years. And analysts, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has noted that the petrostates themselves have earned about $2.5 trillion in windfall profits in just the